Hey, what's up guys? Karlos with Footballtalk here. We're continuing our series of these draft breakdowns after we already talked about the top running backs last week. Like I already mentioned, there's going to be two positions coming out every week on my page, helloswithfootballtalk.com, and then one of them I will break down here on YouTube. I always post on my social media outlets when these actually come out. Those are linked down below in the description, so make sure to follow me there. This week we're talking about edge rushers. Well, really you're talking about those 4-3 defensive ends and 3-4 outside linebackers, but with how hybrid and positionless the NFL is, it's really about guys who can set the edge in the run game, provide pressure as pass rushers, and depending on your scheme to some degree, drop it to coverage. I think this class of edge rushers actually is an underrated one because it doesn't necessarily have that front runner, that clear one that we had in recent years, like a Chase Young, and Nick Bosa, Myles Garrett. But I think my number one here is pretty close to an elite prospect. And to me, there's about 20 names I take within the first 4 rounds. So it's a very deep group. And I actually want to start with a few guys that didn't make the list. Like I just explained, there's so many guys worth mentioning here. Duke is bringing out a couple of them, Invicta Dimokeye and Chris Rumph II. Pittsburgh also does, with Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver. We have Patrick Johnson from Tulane, Hamilcar Rashed from Oregon State, and then a lesser known guy in Allison Smith from Northern Iowa. But these 3 names here I want to break down a little bit more in detail. Quincy Roche, Shaka Toney, and Peyton Turner. Roche was the 2019 AAC Defensive Player of the Year, and then transferred to Miami last season to prove that he can do it against Power 5 competition. And while he wasn't quite as productive, he still was an impact player against the run and pass game. Not the most physical edge set in the run game necessarily, but shows good speed coming off the backside to create those tackles for loss, and is slippery slanting into the B gap where he can create some disruption. As a pass rusher, his speed off the edge really stands out, stresses tackles to open up the hips, and then falls up with good technique, timing up his hand combats to get past them, plus the ability to corner off either foot to get to the quarterback, and when tackles overset him, he will take that inside path. However, not much of a power element in terms of a pass rusher, and in the run game, you see him attack too far upfield at times to open up the B gap on the front side of zone run plays. Probably more of a designated pass rusher early on, where he can definitely be a weapon with his speed off the edge, but I think he has the potential to develop into an every down player as an outside linebacker in a 3-4 front. Shaka Toney, kind of a similar type of player, was a second and first team All Big Ten selection these last couple of years. And I think he's more stout in the run game than people give him credit for. He actually did a good job of holding his ground against Minnesota's massive 400-pound right tackle Daniel Falele last season, and shows good discipline off the backside, while having a closing burst to chase down the quarterback if he keeps the ball. As a pass rusher, his burst and the ability to bend low to the ground, get underneath tackles, is really what gives them trouble. Has shown the ability to convert speed to power to some degree, also at the Senior Bowl, as he transitions to the long arm if tackles get off balance with their feet, but also will never consistently win with power, not overly comfortable dropping out into the flats in those one-on-one tackling situations, and just overall works too far upfield in the run and pass game, which allows lanes in the run game and for the quarterback to escape. I think he'll also be more of a pass rush specialist early on, but I think he can truly be a weapon in that role, because of how much slanting and looping, all the different games that they ran up front at Penn State already, and if he can add a little more to his frame, I could also see him being a 3-down player. And then you have Peyton Turner from Houston, not nearly as technically refined as those other 2 guys, but improved every single year at Houston, and was pretty much a dominant player last season, even though it was limited to just 4 games. Has an 84-inch wingspan, a nice thick frame, great quickness and power to his game, can be a disruptive player in the run game, and has some experience lining up a free technique and being in a penetrating role. In the pass game, his length and suddenness can really give offensive tackles some problems. Has some violence in those hands and they can step around blockers while being dangerous on up and under maneuvers. However, he's still pretty raw and has to learn how to establish a half-man relationship, especially in the run game where he loses track of the ball at times, not proactive enough with his hands and allows blockers to get inside his chest too much, which we really saw at the Senior Bowl, where he was at times dominant in the AAC just because he was physically superior to those other guys, but when he faced offensive linemen with similar talent and who were more technically sound than him, he had some problems getting pressure, but already a pretty productive player who still has a lot of room to grow. and I give him the nod over some of those other developmental edge defenders because I think his skill set is more intriguing heading into the pros than some of those other guys. Now let's get into the list, and at number 10 I have Jordan Smith from UAB, 6'6", 255 pounds, a redshirt junior. Once a top 100 overall recruit for Florida, but was one of 9 players suspended for the 2017 season due to their role in the alleged credit card fraud, started a year at community college, and then transferred to UAB, where he was a second and first team All-Conference USA player these last couple of years respectively. When you put on the UAB tape, his first step really is just different than those other guys on the D-line, can give offensive linemen trouble with his quick hands to get around them in the run game, and create those tackles for loss. And for somebody who played outside linebacker, his speed is pretty crazy in terms of just running guys down in the open field, but also coming from the backside and tracking guys down on outside-oriented runs. Happened last season against Miami, against one of the better dual threats in D'Eriq King on a quarterback sweep who he dragged down for no gain. But what will get him drafted is what he can do as a versatile pressure player from a 2-point stance with his hand in the dirt, at times as an off-ball blitzer and lining up over guards. For Smith, the way he can stress offensive tackles with his speed off the edge and the length that he has to give him some room for error in terms of landing his aiming points on hand swipes, that made it really tough for tackles to put hands on him. Has some wiggle to him to go inside and out, and while he does need to be more consistent with it, flashes the ability to dip and flatten the top of his rush, as well as a sudden spin move to the inside. And those two things in combination, if he can be more consistent with it, are really tough to deal with, because he can force tackles to open the hips, but then also punish them when they do too much of that. When you look at his sack production last season with 4.5 in 8 games, not only exciting, but he provided 10 times as many pressures additionally to it, so 45 of them, giving him a win rate of just over 20% of his pass rush snaps that he provided the pressure. However, he does present a rather skinny build, and at times shows in the run game when he gets taken for a ride if offensive linemen can get inside his frame. As a pass rusher, he also needs to get stronger at powering through the reach of offensive linemen when he crashes through that inside shoulder, for example. And at this point, he doesn't have the greatest pass rush plan yet, and he really needs to work on being consistent with linking his arms and hips together to turn those tighter corners. Just gets too upper in his rush and doesn't present the bull rush threat. In terms of his pass rush toolbox, Smith is really an intriguing player. I don't think he'll ever consistently win with power, but if he can just add a long arm once he gets those tackles off balance, and then works on that spin move as well to get back to the inside if they overset, he can be highly dangerous. Plus, if he bulks up for an NFL training program, I can see him being a quality edge setter in the run game. I think he would fit best in a 3-4 defense as an outside linebacker with a lot of hybrid principles and that utilizes his versatility in passing downs. At number 9 with Karlos Basham from Wake Forest, 6'3.5", 280 pounds, a redshirt senior. The cousin of now Cowboys defensive end Terrell Basham, Karlos has been one of the key players for Wake Forest these last few years, recording 33.5 tackles for loss and 19.5 sacks, to go with 7 forced fumbles and a scoop and score in 33 career games, being named first team All-ACC in 2019 and then third team All-Conference last season despite playing only about half the games. Basham is really a unique player in the way he can torque his pads and slip through creases in the run game, but also has the natural power to stand up linemen and yank them to the side when the ball carrier approaches. It was really interesting to see how Wake Forest taught the defensive linemen to play the run because of how much of the wide zone run game that they faced, not asked to keep up gap integrity, but to try to work around the blocker, cross their face, which oftentimes you saw Basham 5 yards in the backfield at times. But he also has pretty crazy short area quickness for a guy's size to redirect and take down the ball carrier. And you may see one snap him just leveling a guard, trying to trap him, and the next snap they're trying to kick him out, but he just somehow pivots his way around and takes down the ball carrier. Plus, his speed when he's in full-on chase mode is pretty impressive. As a pass rusher, that flexibility to use his upper and lower half separately from each other makes it really tough to put hands on him. He gets a lot of those instant wins with his length and quickness, but also rushes with good tilt coming off the edge and can really ride tackles to the quarterback. You saw Basham line up on the inside quite a bit on passing downs, all the way to a zero technique, where he can give those interior guys a lot of trouble because of how sudden he is and how he may jab one way and then beat them across the face. At the Senior Bowl in particular, he was dominant in those one-on-ones, consistently getting those quick wins, while also being a man at the point of attack when they were in run drills. However, when you look at the way that they defended the run at Wake Forest, no NFL team teaches that type of technique, and Basham started using it at times against pretty much all run schemes. So it will definitely be a transition to him to more of a gap control defense in the run game. As a pass rusher, a lot of wasted movement, not super effective with his hands all the time, has to learn how to play under better control altogether, and while he rarely came off the field for the Demon Deacons, because of that he looked a little tired and couldn't play all out every single snap. Plus he also looked a little overweight last season, so we'll see how that goes. But Basham's one of the more interesting prospects among these defensive linemen. I could really see him play anything from a free technique to a strong set defensive end, be able to have that versatility in passing downs to rush from different spots. His flexibility and balance are really crazy for a guy that size, but he still has to learn how to unleash it. And like I said, that transition as a run defender will be something that he might struggle with early on. At number 8, we have Jayson Oweh from Penn State, 6'5", 255 pounds, just a redshirt sophomore. A former top 100 overall recruit, Oweh had to wait his turn among the Penn State defensive line that included Yetur Gross-Matos and then Shaka Toney, who we started with this last season, after he was more of a rotational player in 2019. Oweh was the 4th name on Bruce Feldman's freak list, which was highlighted by a jaw-dropping reported 40 time of 4.33, and you see that straight line speed at times when he's chasing down wide receivers in the open field. However, when you go to the tape, you see he's more than just a freakish athlete, displays heavy hands in the run game, and has the short area quickness to chase guys down, to where he can read the mesh point on an option run plays patiently, and then still take down either option. Shows good discipline and closes down the space from the backside, but they can also go underneath sift blocks on split zone plays. In terms of the pass game, Oweh has tremendous explosiveness and flexibility in the lower half. You see him consistently shorten the corner with power, and when he slants inside, he can even drive bigger guards backwards. His stutter bull rush in particular can be just devastating for blockers if they stop their feet momentarily, and you see that flexibility to be able to bend off either foot to adjust his path to the quarterback at times. And like I explained with Shaka Toney, a lot of games up front for the Penn State defense has experience with different stunts, looping all the way to the opposite A-gap at times. With that being said, Oweh needs to do a better job of establishing that half-man relationship overall, especially against the run, where you see him kind of get lost in the frame of the blocker at times. He gets caught from the side in those angular blocks at times and his pads pop straight up. And as a pass rusher, he relies too much on his physical tools and the power, rather than utilizing more effective hand combats and being proactive in that regard altogether. And while his pressure numbers were pretty good, with 20 pressures on 171 pass rush snaps, when was the last time you saw somebody drafted in the 1st or 2nd round that had 0 sacks in his last year of college? I'm certainly a little low on Oweh than most analysts out there, because I think you're really banking on the athletic upside. The power and explosiveness are obviously there, but he's still learning how to use those tools and be a productive player with them. And that won't get any easier at the next level. So I'm a little hesitant to draft him in the top 50, because I know there's so many toolsy pass rushers later on in the draft, and I'm not sure how much value you get from the pick. And speaking of talented developmental players, at number 7 we have Gregory Rouse from Miami, 6'7", 265 pounds, also just a redshirt sophomore. Rouse injured his ankle 2 games into his true freshman season, and then had to redshirt the year. In his 2nd season, he started as a backup, but quickly entered the starting lineup, and was one of the most productive players in the country, leading the Hurricanes with 15.5 sacks and 19.5 tackles for loss, to go with a couple of fumbles forced, for which he was named first team All-ACC, and then opted out of last season. Rouse originally was projected to be a top 10 pick in the early mocks for this year's draft, but he has now become one of the most polarizing names out there. When you put on the tape, what really stands out about Rouse are those freakish lanky limbs, and the speed when you just see him run around. Has some quick twitch athleticism to be a disruptive player in the run game, doesn't mind throwing his body around, crashing into pulling linemen and blowing up ball carriers behind the line of scrimmage. And with his length and strength, I could actually see him transition to pulling head up on the tackle and maybe even 2-gap to some degree. Rouse has experience rushing from a 2-point stance, dropping into the flats every once in a while, or staying in the middle as a spy at times. But you're really drafting this guy that high because you think he can be a difference-making pass rusher. At least he has all the tools to do so, in terms of the speed to win around the edge, the power to go through the chest of tackles and shove them out of the way at some point, plus the suddenness and length that make him a problem to deal with on the inside, where he has that quickness and length to step around guys, and he slid inside quite a bit on passing downs, either as a free technique on base downs, or even as a true nose basically, and stunting into the B gap at times. And teams started doubling this guy as games went along because he was wreaking havoc. But at this point, Rousseau, just such a raw player, engages way too straight up and kind of just plays. As a run defender, he still needs to learn the technique of attacking half the man and locking out. Too often gets caught inside the chest of blockers and loses vision on the ball. As a pass rusher, not really showing a plan or being proactive with his hands. Too often, guys who aren't nearly as talented can get the job done because blockers easily land their hands inside his frame and really slow him down. And when you look at his production with 15.5 sacks in 2019, 7 of those came in back-to-back games against Florida State, who were rotating guards, which were both way too slow-footed to stay with him, and in Pittsburgh, where it was more about the limited quarterback athletically in Kenny Pickett scrambling to the sideline and not getting rid of the ball before Rousseau could run him down. When you have a prospect like this, who already produced at a high level, despite lacking technique, that can definitely be seen as a positive, and that's what you're banking on. But Rousseau just didn't win around the edge consistently, and kind of just stumbled into those cleanup sacks on the inside. So he's far from a refined player at this point, which is understandable considering when you watch the tape on him in 2019, he was only 19 years old, and there's a lot of room to grow, because a lot of that production was just due to being superior athletically and kind of just being banged around and landing on top of the quarterback in the end. So if I have a defensive line coach who thinks he can really mold this guy, I don't mind taking the risk sometime on day 2, but considering the numbers that he put up, combined with the athletic profile that he presents, I'm pretty sure he'll get drafted before I'm comfortable with it. At number 6, with Joe Trion from Washington, 6'4", 250 pounds, a redshirt junior, redshirted his first year on campus, and then was more of a rotational player his freshman season. So like Rousseau, really just 1 year of production as a starter, when he recorded 8 sacks and 12.5 tackles for loss in 2019, before opting out of last season to prepare for the draft instead. But he has scouts intrigued with his athletic skill set. Trion has a lot of shock in his hands to set a physical edge in the run game, and doesn't shy away from banging into pulling linemen way behind the line of scrimmage. You see him crash hard off the edge to track ball carriers down from behind, and he just manhandles tight ends in the run game. Trion also was asked to drop into the flat, hooks, or spy the quarterback quite a bit for the Huskies, and he looked smooth going backwards and sideways. That looseness in the lower body also showed up when he can pivot off 1 foot by 90 degrees to shut down screen passes and stuff like that. As a pass rusher, Trion really displays an all-around skill set in terms of a dynamic first step, excellent short area quickness to get around guys, and the strength to not be taken off track on his way to the quarterback, even through contact. He comes off the ball with good lean and tries to shorten the arc with the long arm routinely, with his best move being the chop down, where he kind of just swipes through both arms of the blocker with good timing, and then has the strong ankles to corner tightly. He has the short area quickness to knife through the inside gap, but then can also put offensive tackles on skates when he transitions to the bull rush, as he sees them set him too softly, which really makes him a problem in those wide 9 alignments, because he has the speed to win to the outside if tackles don't get enough depth, but if they get too soft in their sets and stand up, he doesn't mind taking advantage of it and going through them. Trion was already pretty productive in terms of his pressure percentage, and he has experience rushing over the interior free, doing those wide loops and different stunts as a pass rusher. With that being said, he does display poor contain responsibility, just blindly following a key or chasing the ball too hard to allow those cutbacks. You see him lose vision on the ball, and he bites on eye candy too easily. As a pass rusher, he's a little predictable in his approach, and doesn't really string move together particularly well yet. But the more tape I watched on Trion, the more I liked him, in terms of a 3-4 outside backer who can set the edge in the run game, be a two-way pass rusher, drop into coverage, and be a versatile pressure player. He could really be one of the more complete players at that position very soon, despite lacking experience at this point. So if you're thinking about the couple of guys that I just broke down from 7 to 9 or so, a lot of developmental guys. So with Trion, he might be the last sure thing to some degree, get that spot, and therefore could be a highly sought after asset in the late first or early second round. But with that, let's get into the top 5. And first up, we have Joseph Asai from Texas, 6'4", 255 pounds, a junior. Spent the first 10 years of his life in Nigeria, but turned himself into a top 200 overall recruit and joined nearby Texas, where he was playing a very limited role as a freshman, but then emerged as a key piece for that Longhorn defense, first as an off-ball will linebacker, and then transitioning to more of a hybrid outside backer role last season. He used a very unique stance, let's say, early on, where he almost looked like a corner in press coverage with his feet parallel and kind of get around blockers with his hands and quickness. However, he adjusted that to some degree in terms of being able to lock out and set the edge in the run game actually, while still having the quickness to be a slashing type of player, getting around more slow-footed blockers and showing up in the backfield, or backdooring them on zone runs if they overset to the outside. And with Asai, you get a guy who shows all out hustle, some of the best that I've seen in a long time for 60 plus minutes, where he constantly shows up around the football and seemingly at least has one play every game where he chases somebody down 20 plus yards downfield. As a pass rusher, everything Asai does is built off the speed of the edge, where he can really stress tackles and then freeze himself with hand swipes, which really has gotten much better at timing and aiming points. And I thought he also started to become a more successful power rusher as tackles started to set him too soft, stabbing through that inside shoulder and taking a direct path to the quarterback. And he has certainly grown his approach as a pass rusher altogether, while being dangerous as the secondary man in the TE twists, where he has developed much better timing and can loop all the way to the opposite A-gap with the closing speed to take some big shots on the quarterback. However, Asai still attacks too far upfield at times when he should really be stacking up the blocker and holding the point of attack. He still has to learn how to take on pulling linemen and deconstructing blocks altogether as an on-ball defender. In the pass game, Asai just doesn't offer a lot of versatility in his approaches and maneuvers, starting everything off with that speed rush like I said, and then working off a couple of different hand moves. He's not the most natural fit on the edge of the defense, and if you've watched a lot of tape, you can tell that he's always been more of an off-ball defender, where when you go back to the tape before last season, he seemed to get a little lost in space and coverage at times. When you put on last year's Oklahoma State tape, Asai got pancaked at least 3 or 4 times by the Cowboys' massive right tackle Tevin Jenkins, but Asai just kept on coming, and he had a lot of success coming off the other side, or when he was an unblocked defender, and ultimately made the game-winning sack in overtime. So if you draft this guy, you get somebody who will give you his all every single snap, just put up freakish numbers at his pro day, and has already shown a lot of growth, with potential to keep on going that way. Next up, we have another guy from the Big 12, in Ronnie Perkins from Oklahoma, 6'3", 250 pounds, also a junior. A former top 100 overall recruit, Perkins led the Sooners with 5 sacks as a freshman already, and has been an impact player for them ever since. What really stands out right away in the run game is the power in Perkins' hands when you look at the heads of blockers snapping backwards and how that initial contact can really impact things, being able to lock out and hold his ground against offensive tackles that outweigh him by 70-80 pounds. He doesn't mind throwing his body around the run game and is slippery stunting through the B-gap, where he can create a lot of disruption. When the ball crosses the line of scrimmage, Perkins shows that speed to even run on wide receivers at times. As a pass rusher, what I really like about Perkins is the way he compresses the pocket instead of just getting those individual wins. He has plenty of speed and ability to corner to threaten around the edge, but it really serves him best to set up those speed-to-power maneuvers, where he to me is the best at in the entire class, which you see especially from those wide 9 alignments, where he can take offensive tackles for a ride when he attacks their chest. And I just talked about Tevin Jenkins from Oklahoma State. Perkins was the one guy I saw who put the Cowboys' right tackle on his ass by getting him off balance with that burst initially and then driving through with the long arm. Perkins does a great job of timing up the snap and passing downs, and can be a problem in those inside loops with the way he time swings up, can bend off either foot, and has the closing burst to get to the quarterback or chase him out to the sideline to take away angles. On the flip side, Perkins does get washed down the line at times in his own run game, where he tries to slant through the inside gap, and I don't know exactly how much freedom he was given in that Sooners scheme, but he definitely showed a lack of discipline overall in the run game, being sloppy with his contained responsibility, or pretty much scraping over the top of the action, almost like a backside linebacker. As a pass rusher, he's not nearly as effective if offensive linemen get his hands inside his frame first, and he lacks a reliable counter at this point. When I look at the sack numbers for Perkins, especially last season, they don't nearly come close to representing what type of player he is, with a pressure per pass rush efficiency of over 18%. He's a physical run defender who doesn't mind throwing his body around and has tremendous pursuit speed. And while he does have to be a little more disciplined at times and was taken off the field quite a bit, so you have to see where his stamina is at exactly, when he's out there, he's a wrecking ball. And with that, we move into the top three, and I think all three of those guys are highly deserved of going in the first round. First up, with Azeez Solari from Georgia, 6'3", 240 pounds, just a redshirt sophomore. If not for a torn ACL his senior year of high school, he would have probably been one of the top overall recruits, but as soon as he stepped on the field for Georgia, he looked ready for the NFL, and was the first freshman to gain captain status on a Kirby Smart Bulldog defense. Solari led the team in sacks these last couple of years and earned second-team All-ICC honors along the way last season. He played kind of a hybrid outside backer defensive end role for the Bulldogs, which they call Jack in their system, and something I just don't understand, he gets labeled as kind of this finesse pass rusher. Just put on the Alabama game, watch him bang into 350-pound Deontay Brown, the huge guard for the Crimson Tide, and just the way in general, how he meets pulling linemen in the backfield, bringing them to a complete stop as soon as they collide, shows good discipline with his contain, and for a 240-pound outside backer, his play strength is much better than it gets credit for, and he plays assignment-proof football. Plus, he shows tremendous effort through the whistle. Last season, he was asked more to pick up guys out of the backfield and stay with them, which he did pretty well on those flat and swing routes, while also quickly identifying screen passes. In the pass game, Solari's burst and bend, combined with being patient and well-timed with his hand swipes, made him one of the most dangerous guys rushing off the edge. His primary moves are a chop rip and a stab to chop, where he showed several different variations depending on how offensive tackles reacted to it. Also has some shock in his hands if tackles set him too softly to hit the long arm and take a direct path to the quarterback. And Solari is a team-first pass rusher who knows how to set up different games up front and free up his teammates at times. Last season, he was the most productive pass rusher in the SEC in terms of per snap basis, recording 37 total quarterback pressures on just under 200 pass rushing snaps. In particular, he had a monster game against Cincinnati in the second half in the Sugar Bowl, where, to be fair, came against the backup, but he recorded 3 sacks, including the game-changing strip that really helped the Bulldogs win that game. For Solari, while I do believe he's an underrated run defender, when an offensive tackle gets momentum going and widens that B-gap, Solari is a tough time of still steadying the edge and getting his hips around. As a pass rusher, he doesn't offer the most versatile array of moves, which I just discussed, and when tackles land a solid punch, he really opens up that chest and can't really dip underneath them anymore, to where those hand swipes become much less effective. And considering he's 240 pounds and probably has to do some coverage duties, he doesn't look overly comfortable moving in space, while also never having played more than 52 snaps in a game. When I look at this class, they are obviously more physically strong edge defenders in terms of the run game, but I think Solari is far from just a speedy pass rusher. He really competes in the run game, and other than my number one guy, I think he can make the biggest difference as a pass rusher from day one on. I believe Solari would fit really well as a Leo in an even front, which those Seattle-style defenses use, but I think he can also play free for outside backer and base if he just limits his coverage duties. At number 2, with Vydy Pay from Michigan, 6'4", 275 pounds, a senior. Actually born in a refugee camp in Guinea, Pay and his family came over to the US when he was only 6 months old. In high school, he was one of the top track athletes in the state of Rhode Island and played running back for the football team. He reported to Ann Arbor at just under 230 pounds, but quickly grew his body and improved every single season, earning second-team All-Big Ten accolades his last couple of years. Pay was the number 1 guy on Bruce Feldman's 2020 freak list, in particular because of one testing number, the free cone drill, where he put up the second fastest number among all Wolverine teammates, when those other guys in his range were around 200 pounds. Pay took on a bigger role his junior season, but I thought took another major step last year, which was apparent right away in the season opener against Minnesota, when he recorded 3 tackles for loss and was in the face of quarterback Tanner Morgan all game long. As a pass rusher, Pay comes out of his stance with some wiggle and has that quick twitch athleticism to get around blockers. His best move is the push-pull because he has plenty of force in his hands and then has a feel for when offensive linemen lean into him to yank them to the side. Plus he gets a lot of those late wins by pulling offensive linemen off himself. However, he also has those long arms to be riding around the edge with the offensive tackle attached to him, and then still be able to tomahawk with an off arm at the quarterback's arm to get the ball out. Pay has some experience sliding inside to a free technique on some base downs, and then across the front on passing downs, where his quickness can really create some mismatches on the inside. And thanks to his closing speed, he's very dangerous as a looper on different games up front, and can even create some vertical push when banging into guards on inside slants. Guys like Pay get drafted in the top 20 because of their upside as a pass rusher, but I think this guy is already close to an elite run defender. He's almost robotic in the way that he can set the edge, step in, lock out, and shift his weight properly. When that first punch lands, you see offensive linemen jerk backwards. On zone runs away from him, he can flatten down the line and has the speed to chase guys down. But what is really crazy about him is that ridiculous ability to change directions, which you can see when he reads the mesh point and can really take away both options, step in on a run fake and then still get outside to chase down a speed sweep, or just the way he can control the edge and then slip back underneath to take down the ball carrier in the B gap. With Pay, every once in a while he will lose sight of the ball carrier because he's so focused on dealing with the blocker and misses out on opportunities because of it. I wouldn't call him a top tier speed or power rusher necessarily, a little limited in his length and gets too hung up at times with the hands of the blocker. And while it did show improvement throughout his junior season, it really took him 3.5 years to become a dominant college player despite his athletic gifts. When you look at the 2 sacks that Pay had last season, it may seem like a bit of a turnoff for potentially the first edge rusher off the board, but it did add 20 additional pressures to his statistical output. I think with him, you get pretty close to a top tier run stuffer and somebody with a lot of potential as a pass rusher. To me, he's primarily a 4-3 defensive end who can also rush over guards in passing situations and whose great change of direction can be unleashed with creative defensive line stunts. And at number 1, with Jalen Phillips from Miami, 6'5", 265 pounds, a redshirt junior. Once one of the top overall recruits in the country, Phillips started his career at UCLA, where he was a rotational player his freshman season, but suffered 3 different concussions and because of it was forced to medically retire. Almost a full 2 years later, teams started to contact him, and he ultimately decided to join Miami, where he turned himself into one of the most complete defensive ends in the country, and was named a second-team All-American for recording 15.5 tackles for loss, 8 sacks, 3 passes knocked down, and an interception. I pretty much completely forgot about this kid just because he was so off the radar, but he got better throughout the season and now finds himself atop my edge rankings. And it doesn't take a great scout to see the talent. Just put on the tape. Probably after the first quarter, you've seen pretty much everything you need to see in terms of the explosiveness of the snap, the length, flexibility, and just being able to put it all together. Phillips is a man amongst boys out there and plays with a ton of energy, has the firm base and length to set the edge, but then also the quickness to go back underneath and backdoor zone blockers. He shows good discipline as an unblocked defender from the backside, closing down the distance to the nearest blocker and deciphering the mesh point, plus then has the quick burst to run down whoever has the ball. His change of direction and mobility in the hips to redirect against reverses and all that kind of stuff is really impressive, and he was a TFL machine for Miami. As a pass rusher, Phillips' upside is really through the roof, accelerates through those long strides, and then has the flexibility and the lean to flatten to the quarterback at the top of his rush. For somebody with such little experience, his hand usage is really advanced, especially the cross-chop move that he uses, can pin the inside arm of the tackle whilst he's going around the edge, and because of how long his arms are, he can still get a hand on the quarterback as well. Plus he has much better shake to him than you'd expect, and he's almost unstoppable in those up and under moves, which he follows up with the arm over and makes it all one fluid motion. Phillips also slid inside quite a bit on passing downs and partially took on the role of Gregory Rouse the year before, but this number 15 actually got a lot of those instant wins, especially with the high swim, rather than just ending up with those cleanup sacks. Overall, he provided the pressure on almost 15% of his pass rush snaps, and in particular, he bullied Virginia Tech's right tackle and was the biggest reason they won that game. As far as the negatives go, Phillips does lose contain at times when the offense tries to seal him on the backside of runs and he wants to peek inside. I'd like to see him use his power more as a pass rusher, and he still has room to grow in terms of adjusting on the fly as he reads pass sets, even though he definitely showed signs of improvement in that area. He presents too much of his frame and allows blockers to land punches. But the biggest question with Phillips is his health, having played just 700 total snaps, because concussions are obviously a very serious topic, and we have to acknowledge it here, but I just don't have the information to be able to talk on it, and I can just evaluate what I see on the film. And with that, he's clearly my number one edge in this class, and I've been kind of hyping him up since the fall. That ability to use his upper and lower body independently, the length, short area quickness, and hustler displays are all highly impressive. He looked a little rusty early on, but you saw him improve week by week, and if you put on any tape of the second half of the season, there's really not much bad you can find. Now let's give a little recap of this top 10 here. Phillips is at the top, and there's some separation to the rest of the group. 2 and 3 I believe absolutely deserve to be going in the first round. 4 to 6 also all top 50 prospects for me, and I expect at least 1 or 2 of them to go in the first round as well. 7 to 9 are more developmental players who have a lot of talent but also plenty to clean up. And then at number 10, Jordan Smith for me got the nod over Quincy Roche, Shaka Toney, and Peyton Turner, but to me belongs more in that group of guys. And that brings us to the end. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, share it with some people that you know enjoy following the draft and are looking for NFL content in general throughout the offseason. Like I already mentioned, the offensive tackle list is on my page, and an even more detailed breakdown of the edge class is coming out tomorrow on my page, HelloToFootballtalk.com. I've linked that down below in the description, as well as my social media handles, where you will see every time I post something, plus I post some extra content and some of my opinions and stuff happening around the league. As far as the YouTube channel goes, I'll be back next week with my breakdown of the interior offensive line, a group that I think isn't talked about enough in this process, with a lot of interesting names. So until then, see you later. Peace!